Wyoming Territory, 1882. The wind cut across the empty plains like a blade, and the sun was just starting to rise when Jackson Slater stepped into the feed store's back lot and caught sight of a boot sticking out from behind a stack of hay bales. He drew his Colt instinctively, but the shape did not move. Quiet. Still, he stepped closer, boots crunching on the frost-bitten dirt. Behind the stack, curled up in a threadbare quilt with straw tangled in her hair, was a girl, no, a woman fast asleep. Her cheeks were red from the cold, her fingers tucked under her chin, and she looked worn thin by something deeper than the weather. Jackson lowered the Colt. "Ma'am," she startled awake, blue eyes wide, and scrambled back against the wall, clutching the quilt to her chest. Her face flushed. I did not take anything, I swear." "I did not say you did," Jackson said calmly, sliding the gun back into its holster. "I just came to check on the horses. You always sleep in other folks' storehouses?" She looked down. "No, just last night." "I had nowhere else to go." Jackson studied her. She was young, early 20s maybe, but nothing about her looked soft. She had that silent grit he had seen in folks who had lived through more than their share. "What is your name?" She hesitated. Willa Easton." He tipped his hat. "Jackson Slater." She looked at him like she had heard the name before. Maybe she had. He had been running cattle up from Texas for near 8 years, and his brand was known in these parts. "Is this your storehouse?" she asked, voice small. "No, belongs to a man named Herrick. I just rent the back stalls for feed when I am in town." She nodded, her hands trembling slightly. She tried to stand, but the cold had stiffened her legs. Jackson stepped forward, offering a hand. She hesitated again, then took it. Her fingers were ice. "You got family here in Larkspur?" he asked. She looked away. "Not anymore." He did not press. He helped her out of the straw, and she wrapped the quilt tighter around her shoulders, glancing at the sun rising in the east. "I will go," she said. "I just needed one night." "I did not mean you hungry." She looked up sharply. "There is a cafe down the street. Not much, but their eggs are warm. Come on." She blinked, and for a second he saw something shift in her expression, hope, maybe, or disbelief. "I cannot pay. I did not ask you to." She followed him in silence, and they walked through morning streets where the dust had not yet lifted. Inside the cafe, Willa sat stiffly, hands folded on her lap, eyes scanning the room like she expected someone to throw her out any minute. Jackson ordered eggs and biscuits for them both. "You from here?" he asked once the plates arrived. She shook her head. "My family came up from Missouri. My daddy was a tanner, but he passed last winter. Mama got sick not long after. It was just me and my little brother by spring." He frowned. "How old is he?" He was 9. Her voice cracked and she looked away. "He died in June." Jackson went still. "I am sorry," she nodded, lips pressed tight. "I had no money left. I sold the wagon. Tried to work at the boarding house, but the owner wanted things I would not give. I have been sleeping wherever I can." He sat back, eyes on her. No lies, no dramatics, just plain truth, and it hit him in the gut. "What about your family's debts?" She looked down. "They took everything. Herrick said he would let me work it off, but he stopped giving me shifts 2 weeks ago. I think he was hoping I would get desperate." Jackson's jaw tightened. He had dealt with men like Herrick before, sweaty, thick-fingered cowards who preyed on the desperate. He looked at her. "How much?" She blinked. "What? The debt, how much?" She shook her head. "It does not matter." "I am not asking how much," she swallowed. $82. He stood. She looked up, confused. "Where are you going?" "To pay it." Willa's eyes widened. "You cannot." "I can." She stood quickly and grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Why would you do that for me?" He looked down at her. "Because you are not trash, and you do not deserve to sleep in a pile of hay like you are." Her eyes filled, but she blinked fast and let go of his arm. Jackson walked out the door and down the street, boots hitting the boards hard. He found Herrick in the back of his store, counting ledgers with a smirk on his round face. "Slater," Herrick said, surprised. "Need more feed?" Jackson dropped the money on the desk. 82, that cover Willa Easton's debt," Herrick blinked. "Well, yes, but good, it is cleared." "You will not bother her again." Herrick straightened. "Now hold on. She owes, not anymore." Jackson turned and walked out without waiting for the man's reply. Back at the cafe, Willa was still sitting in the corner, hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had long gone cold. She stood when he returned. "I paid it," he told her, her eyes filled again. "Why? Because you deserve better, and you are getting it." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a brass key. "The bunkhouse on my ranch is empty. It is warm, and it has a stove and a bed. You need it. And I need someone to help cook for the hands." She stared at the key. "I am not offering charity. I am offering a job and a roof and a door that locks when you want it to." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she nodded and took the key with shaking fingers. "I do not know how to thank you. You do not have to." Later that day, Jackson helped her onto his horse and they rode out of town together. As the town disappeared behind them, she pressed her cheek against his back, quiet and still, and for the first time in a long while she felt safe. Neither of them said much on the ride, but something settled between them, like maybe the worst had already passed. And maybe, just maybe, something good was waiting ahead. The bunkhouse sat west of the main ranch house, past the windbreak of tall pines and the corral where the geldings stood quiet in the early dusk. Willa stepped inside alone, the key still warm in her palm, her breath catching when she saw the single bed tucked against the wall and the stove already laid with kindling. A basin of water sat ready beneath the window, and a folded wool blanket waited at the foot of the mattress. Jackson hadn't followed her in. He'd only said, "I'll be in the barn. Take your time." She set her satchel down with care, though it held little more than a comb, a change of underthings, and the faded Bible that had belonged to her mother. Kneeling beside the stove, she struck the match with unpracticed fingers. It caught on the third try. The warmth spread fast, and she sat back on her heels, watching the flames curl around the pine shavings. The silence thickened until she heard the barn door creak open. She found him at the far end, brushing down a roan with a white blaze. The air inside smelled of horses and old hay, and the light slanting through the gaps in the boards gave everything a gold edge. "I can cook," she said from the doorway, voice low. Jackson didn't look up. "Good. I'm used to feeding 8 by sunup. I'll need flour and salt pork if you've got it. Coffee too. We've got all 3. She took a step inside. "You want me rising with the hands. Soon as you're ready. I'm ready now." He set the brush down at last, glancing over his shoulder. "You don't need to prove anything to me. I know." She folded her arms. "But I'd rather earn my place than sit warm while someone else does the work." He studied her a long moment. "You'll have your say over what you do and don't do. No one here'll press you. I'm not afraid of work. I can see that." She looked past him toward the open stall. A young black mare watched her with ears perked. "She yours?" Jackson nodded. "Call her Junie. She's green yet, but she's got a good mind. She reminds me of one we had. Buckskin named Mabel, stubborn as sin but sweet with my brother." He didn't speak and she didn't push further. "I'll start breakfast come morning," she said, "but I'll need to know who I'm feeding. 8 hands. They keep to themselves mostly." "You won't need to talk more than you want to." She gave a short nod. "All right." A pause passed between them, quiet but not uncomfortable. "You ever lived on a working ranch before?" he asked. "No, closest we came was a berry farm near St. Joseph. But I learned fast. I'll show you around tomorrow after the morning meal." She looked toward the hills beyond the barn. The sun had dipped lower, setting the tops of the pines alight. "Does it stay this quiet out here?" she asked. He leaned against the stall door. "Most days. I think I like that." He didn't answer, but she caught the slight ease in his posture. Later that night, she lay beneath the wool blanket in the bunkhouse, listening to the wind shift through the trees. The stove gave off a steady heat, and the mattress was soft beneath her. Her hands were still, for the first time in weeks, not clutching for warmth or safety. Outside, the ranch settled into its own rhythm, horses shifting, owls calling out across the dark. Willa curled onto her side and let her eyes drift closed, not from exhaustion but from the unfamiliar weight of peace. She didn't know what came next, not yet. But for the first time in a long while, she wasn't bracing for the worst. Someone had opened a door without asking anything back. and she'd walked through it. In the stillness, she let herself believe she might belong after all. Willa rose before the sky had softened, her breath visible in the air as she lit the stove and stirred cornmeal into boiling water. The bunkhouse was quiet but for the crackle of fire and the creak of the floor under her bare feet. When the mush thickened, she packed it into a tin and wrapped it in a cloth to carry up to the main house, where she'd been told to use the larger kitchen. The trail from her door to the big house lay beneath frost-hardened grass. She kept her eyes ahead, boots pressing careful prints into the earth. No one had spoken to her since she'd arrived except Jackson, but the silence didn't feel like suspicion, just habit, men used to their routines. Inside the kitchen, she found a wide iron stove, a stack of clean pans, and a basket of eggs left on the counter, as if someone had known she'd be coming. She cracked them one by one, stirring in salt from a clay jar, and cut the bacon into strips, setting them to fry. By the time the sun crested the far ridge, the smell had filled the kitchen and Boots approached the porch. The first man through the door was tall, weathered with gray at his temples and a scar down the left side of his jaw. He paused in the doorway. "You the new cook?" "I am," she said, not turning from the stove. "You got a name?" She kept her voice even. "Willa Easton." He stepped inside. "I'm Emery, been with Slater since the Texas drives." She nodded once. "Plates are on the shelf above the basin." "Coffee's ready." More followed, men with sun-reddened skin and calloused hands, some quiet, a few nodding as they passed her to sit. None asked questions. None stared too long. She set food on the table without speaking, her shoulders squared, her face unreadable. Jackson appeared only after the last man had taken his place. He poured himself coffee and leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "You sleep all right?" "I did." He gave a slow nod and pushed away from the wall to take the seat nearest the window. She set a plate in front of him and met his eyes for a breath. "I'll clean up once they're done. You don't need to rush. I'd rather keep my hands busy." After breakfast, she scrubbed the pans and swept the floor, then stepped outside to shake out the cloths. A soft snow had begun to fall, just a dusting, but it clung to the grass and settled in her hair as she stood, watching the hills. Jackson came up beside her, pulling on his gloves. "I'll walk you through the line fence today. Needs mending before the cattle are moved." She turned to him. "You want me to help, only if you're willing." "I am." They rode out together, the snow light on their shoulders. The fence ran low along the edge of a draw, some posts leaning, wire sagging in places. Jackson handed her a pair of pliers and showed her how to twist the wire tight again, how to brace the post with a stone when the frost had loosened the ground. She worked in silence, hands raw from the cold, but her breath came easier. There was something steadying in the rhythm of it. Pull, twist, hammer down. Midway through the second stretch, she glanced over. "You always run this place alone?" Jackson adjusted a post before answering. "My brother helped for a time. He left for Nevada last spring. Said he was tired of dirt under his fingernails." "That bother you?" "Some, but folks go where they think they'll be lighter. Can't fault a man for chasing that." She nodded and twisted the wire firm. "I thought I'd get married before now," she said, voice low. "Not because I was in a hurry. Just seemed like what came next. I never expected to outlive my whole family instead." Jackson didn't speak for a long moment. Then he knelt beside the next post and tugged it straight. "My father died when I was 16. Lightning took him clean off the wagon. We buried him before the rain dried." She looked at him. "Your mother, gone before that, fever." "Was it just you and your brother then?" He nodded. She didn't ask more. They worked until the light shifted and the snow melted off their coats. When the last post stood straight and the wire held taut, Jackson stood back. "You did good work." "My palms'll say otherwise." He glanced at her hands. "Come on, we'll get you salve back at the house." On the ride back, they didn't speak. But when they passed the frozen creek, Jackson slowed his horse. "There's wild plums in that grove come spring," he said. Willa leaned forward in the saddle. "I've never picked wild fruit before." "You will." Back at the bunkhouse, she washed her hands and rubbed the salve he'd given her over the cracked skin. It smelled of pine resin and something sweeter. She sat near the stove, fingers warm, and looked out the window to where the light faded into gold behind the trees. A knock came at the door. When she opened it, Jackson stood there with a small oil lamp. "Yours," he said, "in case the fire dies down overnight." She took it gently. "Thank you." He stepped back, then paused. "You ain't got to prove anything to me, Willa." She looked him full in the face. "I know, but I want to prove it to myself." He held her gaze a moment longer, then tipped his hat and turned down the path toward the house. She closed the door and lit the lamp, setting it on the table. The flame flickered steady. The wind moved outside, but inside everything held. The first real thaw came early in March. Snowmelt trickled down the slopes behind the barn, and the earth began to soften underfoot, leaving boot tracks deep and wide across the yard. Willa stood in the doorway of the bunkhouse, apron tied over her dress, sleeves pushed to her elbows, and watched the mist lift off the pasture like breath. Jackson rode in from the south fence line just after sunrise, coat damp from the ride, his hat pulled low. He dismounted without a word and led his gelding into the corral, rubbing its neck with one gloved hand. Willa crossed the yard to meet him, wiping her palms on her apron. "You didn't eat." He looped the reins over the post. "Didn't feel like waiting." "I set coffee out." "I saw." She crossed her arms. "You're avoiding something." He looked at her then, really looked, and his jaw flexed once before he sighed. "I got a letter from Fort Laramie. They're asking for another sale come May. Drought downstates pushed some ranchers east." She stepped closer. "That's good, isn't it?" "It is, but I'll have to take the herd myself. 2 weeks out, maybe more." "You've done it before." He nodded. "I have. But not since I've had someone to come back to." Her breath hitched, just once, and she dropped her gaze. "You mean me?" "I do." She felt the weight of it settle between them, not heavy exactly, but rooted. It wasn't something said lightly, not by him. "I've never had someone say a thing like that to me," she said quietly. "I don't say what I don't mean." The wind shifted, warmer than yesterday. She looked to where the horses grazed near the far fence, then back at him. "You'll need someone to keep things steady here." "I trust you to do that." She pulled her shawl tighter. "I've never run a ranch house. You know how to hold things together." "That's more than most." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you worry I'll leave?" "No." "Why not?" "Because I've seen what you do when things get hard. You don't run." He said it without flattery or softness, just truth. She didn't answer, but her chest rose with a long, slow breath that left her steadier on her feet. That evening, she stayed behind after supper and scrubbed the last of the plates alone. The hands had taken to her food with quiet appreciation, no words, but second helpings, and plates scraped clean. She didn't need more than that. Jackson came in while she was drying the last pan, his coat slung over one shoulder. "I've been thinking," he said. She turned, cloth still in hand. "If I'm gone that long and you're here running the place, it'd be easier if you were living in the main house." She blinked. "I don't need to. I know." She set the pan down. "It's not about space. Or comfort." "I wasn't offering it for comfort." She stepped around the table, her hands clasped in front of her. "What would people say?" "I don't care. I do." He met her gaze. "Then marry me." The silence that followed was full, not empty or strained, just filled with the sound of the wind outside, the faint creak of the rafters, the pulse in her ears. "You mean it?" "I wouldn't say it otherwise." She looked at him, and for a moment she looked right through the man in front of her to everything that had come before, every hard mile, every night she'd gone to sleep not sure she'd wake with a roof still over her. All of it had led here. To this. "I don't have a dress," she said. "We'll find something. I've got no family to stand with me. I'll stand with you." She stepped forward and he didn't move, only watched her with the same quiet steadiness he always carried. "Then yes," she said. "I'll marry you." His shoulders eased, just the smallest bit, and he reached out, taking her hand in his. His palm was rough, warm, and he held her like she was something precious, not fragile. Outside, the sky had turned the color of river stone and the first stars blinked into view. Inside, everything had shifted, just slightly, not loud, not sudden but certain. She leaned into him, her head against his chest, and his arm came around her back without hesitation. They stood like that for a long time, nothing needing to be said. The wedding took place on a quiet Sunday in late April, just as the cottonwoods along the creek began to leaf out in pale green. Willa stood in the parlor of the main house, wearing a dress sewn from the fabric Jackson had brought back from town, cream calico with small blue flowers, fitted at the waist, simple but new. Her hands were steady as she tied the last ribbon at the back of her neck, the morning sun falling soft across the floorboards. Emery stood near the fireplace, buttoning his coat. "You sure you don't want to wait for a preacher to come through?" Willa turned from the mirror. "Jackson asked you." "I said yes, that's all I need." His nod was slow, respectful. "I'll say the words right. You always do." Outside, the yard had been cleared of tools and wagons. The ranch hands stood in a half-circle near the porch, hats in their hands, every one of them freshly shaved and stiff in their Sunday shirts. Junie stood tied near the barn, her mane combed, a strip of red cloth braided through it. Someone had swept the porch clean, and a jar of wild violets sat on the railing. Jackson waited at the bottom of the steps, his coat pressed, collar crisp. He did not fidget or shift. He only watched the door, waiting for her. When she stepped outside, the hush was immediate, not from surprise, but from reverence. She walked to him without hesitation, her boots brushing against the earth, the hem of her dress catching the breeze. "You look like spring," he said. She smiled without shyness. "You look like home." Emery stood between them, clearing his throat once before beginning. The words were plain, spoken with the gravity of men who'd seen sorrow but still chose to bear witness to joy. No vows were read from paper, just spoken from memory, promises to care, to stand beside, to keep. When Emery said, "You may seal it," Jackson reached for her hand first. His thumb brushed her knuckles and he leaned in, kissing her with a tenderness that asked nothing and offered everything. The hands clapped, a few giving low whistles before turning away to give them space. Willa and Jackson didn't move for a long moment. She rested her forehead against his, and he exhaled like something long held had finally let go. That evening, she cooked a stew with venison and barley, and they ate with the men around a fire lit near the barn. The stars came out one by one, and someone brought out a fiddle. Willa sat beside Jackson on the bench, her shoulder against his, a quilt wrapped around both their legs. "You thinking about the trail drive?" she asked quietly. "For now, I'm thinking about this. I want to plant a garden," she said. "Behind the bunkhouse where it catches sun, you'll have it. I want to raise chickens. I'll build you a coop," she paused, "and if we have a child," his hand found hers under the quilt, "then we'll raise them here. With clean air and honest work, and a mother who doesn't back down from anything." She pressed her cheek to his shoulder. "You'll be a good father. I aim to be." When the fire burned low, they walked back to the house together, not rushed, not speaking much, just steps in rhythm, the creek whispering beyond the trees. Inside, the parlor smelled of pine resin and warm wood. Jackson lit the oil lamp while Willa unpinned her hair. She turned to him, the lamplight catching the curve of her cheek. "Are you happy?" "I've never been anything else since you came here." His voice was soft, sure. She opened her arms, and he stepped into them like he'd been waiting his whole life to do so. That night, they lay in the marriage bed with the windows open to the sound of frogs calling down by the water. His hand rested over hers on the quilt, both of them still, breathing the same air. No fear. No hunger. No waiting. By late May, the cattle had been sold off, the hands paid their season's share, and the ranch settled into a slower rhythm. Willa spent her mornings in the garden, coaxing beans and squash from the warming earth, while Jackson hauled timber for a new henhouse. He built it sturdy, with a latch she could open with one hand and a roof that wouldn't leak. In June, she missed her courses. In July, the doctor from Casper confirmed what they already guessed. Jackson built a cradle from pine, carving stars into the headboard with careful hands. The baby came in the middle of a thunderstorm the next spring, a girl with lungs like a wild thing and her father's calm eyes. They named her Clara after Willa's mother, and she was baptized in the same creek that ran past the cottonwoods where they were married. Years passed. The ranch grew. So did Clara. Willa taught her to read by firelight, and Jackson taught her to ride bareback through the pasture. They planted more trees, added a second barn, and hosted Sunday suppers that drew in neighbors from 3 valleys over. Through it all, the love between them never dulled. It deepened. Quiet glances across crowded tables. A hand on the small of a back as they passed through a doorway. A kiss at dusk in the shadow of the garden gate. They grew older, their hands weathered. Their shoulders bore the weight of years, but they never walked apart, not once. And every night when the house grew quiet and the lamps burned low, Jackson would pull Willa close, and she'd rest her head over his heart, right where she'd always belonged.